in a more joined up way we can deliver services at a locality level. So what Supporting Leicestershire Families did was pull together all organisations, regardless of where they sat, to deliver cohesively for children of our most vulnerable families. And again, the SLF model is not only managed centrally and delivered locally, but it is aligned very closely to our other central services, such as the Youth Offending Service, our Children's Social Care Services, and our other early help services, as well as very closely aligned to services that are currently held within our district and borough councils, such as housing and benefits. And what we know from our Supporting Leicestershire Families work is that what works best is having staff based out in localities in order to build those local partnership working. So again, I think what these examples give us is an opportunity to build on our best practice going forward around that kind of central leadership, that consistency of delivery, but also around ensuring that at a local level people understand their areas.
Thank you. It's Mr. Walsh, please.
I'm not so convinced on the community safety area. At the moment, the police map their area commanders with those boundaries, and I chair the Blabian, Hinckley and Bosworth Scrutiny panel. And the way that you described it, Jane, when you talked about the teams, the CSP teams and social behaviour teams at the district and borough councils, you implied that it was almost like admin, but they're not. They're officers out dealing with local issues. Although there might be savings at the margin, those people still work out of those areas with the local police, and the police teams are wrapped around that. So I'm not convinced that the model you're suggesting improves on that. And your last bit was that this will make it clearer what those communities are to residents. Well, I think pretty much the residents aren't daft. They know where to go to deal with crime issues, and it's to those local councils. So if there's savings in senior managers and directors, possibly, but at that ground level, I just don't see it. And I certainly don't see the evidence in this paper that, to me, convinces me that this could be delivered.
Mrs. Wright.
I'm just a little bit confused on when we talk about housing and we say, it'll give us one communication point where we go to. Surely you'll still have to negotiate with registered providers and everything that are still in the market there, and because some of the districts don't have a housing stock, so you're still going to have to do that. And I'm not sure when we talk about 106 money how it fits in with the area committees and everything that will be set up to deal with planning. So that's one point. The other thing about districts and the eradication of duplication is districts don't have statutory duties on a lot of things. I mean, I know they deliver prevention, but they don't have statutory duties to actually deliver as we do. So I'm just wondering where the savings are on that. And probably I think we've covered the community and vulnerable people and the geographic. So it's just those two, please.
Thank you. Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. At the moment, we have, not only do we have 7 district council areas, but we also have a number of, as you say, registered housing providers as well. The reference that I'm making in the paper around housing is really around policy. So at the moment, we have a different way of dealing with housing in 7 different areas. I think the opportunity is to have a single response to how we deal with our housing stock or our housing policy, and certainly move away from our frontline staff having to negotiate with 7 different authorities, often where we're moving a child from one area to another. So it allows some of that opportunity. Your point around duplication and savings, what I'd hoped was set out in this paper was opportunities for residents that were over and above just the opportunities around savings. So as I've set out in the 2 case studies, What we know at the moment is that there are 7 different sites that people can go to find out about how to report antisocial behaviour. What we know is that people do go to the wrong area to report things, and often it's not clear who holds responsibility for what. So some of the ambition that we've set out within this paper isn't just around financial benefits, but it's actually about better outcomes and better pathways for our service users in terms of clarity. And you're right in pointing to the services that districts deliver around early help. Certainly those services add significant value to the work in local areas. I think the opportunity afforded through a unitary structure is that it's better joined up, and that potentially we can look at where there are more than one access points for families, but also where there may be duplication in areas.
Mr. Sheehan.
Yeah, something just occurred to me, so I don't know if I've jumped in at the wrong place here, but if you're going to allow local planning decisions to be taken with these area committees, are you still not imposing a local plan that's going to be county-wide? Because that determines land use to a great extent and takes away a lot of the work of the planning committees.
This actually does come onto the next one, where you can have a free-for-all and ask all sorts of questions. So at this point, I'm going to bank that and go to Mr. Old.
Thank you, Chair. I wanted to pick up the 106 money because I have to sign off all of the agreements for the entire county. And there are a team of officers in children's services working with different councils, and we get very different responses. So I think there are 2 levels on this. For instance, the one level is the one that Jane has referred to, that some services will need to operate for those very individual young people across any part of Leicestershire, who at the moment may not have a great deal of choice, but we've revamped the way that we ask for 106 money. And then you've got the one that I think Geoffrey referred to this morning in his area of lack of places in schools. Now, unfortunately, the Department for Communities and Local Government and the Department for Education have never met to resolve the issue of allowing schools free catchment areas. So if a school expands its catchment area into a different authority, when you come to 106 money, you still have to recognise the fact that it's the boundary of Leicestershire that you have to ask within. It would be a lot simpler if we had one group that were dealing with that. In terms of early help and social care, I need to refer you all to paragraph 11, where it says quite clearly, unequivocally, a single unitary authority could provide opportunities for alignment of children's services delivered by districts, including reduction of duplication and having a single referral route. I've worked, and I'm used to working in partnership with all 7 district and borough councils. I'm on record as saying that if you're going to do the best you can for children and young people, it is essential that you have partnership working under the current structure. But I'm held politically accountable for a department which is demand-led. When a child needs to come into care, you can't predict that very accurately in terms of forward planning. When a child needs special educational needs, who a decade ago would have died at birth, but is still alive and maintained for the rest of their life with huge intensive support to maintain their life condition, you can't predict that. And what we face at the moment, and what this committee faces at the moment, is the issue of demand-led budgets, which are causing the Children and Family Service Department to overspend. I refer to earlier this year, when I had to go out personally to the meetings that were held to discuss the potential closure of children's centres, and what we actually found in terms of the information that came out from that exercise. For instance, in the city, you had the clinical commissioning group paying to use children's centres, and neither East nor West Leicestershire clinical commissioning groups would do that in the county. To put it very bluntly, some of the things in this report act at the moment, but they are not statutorily required. So, for instance, the impact team is not a statutory responsibility. Maintaining desirable but not statutorily required early help services. But it is a statutory responsibility, for taking children into care, at times having to spend £200,000-300,000 on a single child to put them into care. You only need 3 and you're £1 million over your budget. And I know that those people who sit on the Children's Social Care panel with me are very well aware of these facts. But when you've got demand-led budgets and you know that you're in a position whereby you could be, the county council could be financially threatened in its viability within a few years, you have to look outside the box. And what appears to be the case to me is this: if you maintain the current system, you are spending £31 million of taxpayers' money, which does not actually is not being used to help those with adult social care needs, those with children's social care needs, or the other factors that I've just described. And it is you will make your own minds up, but it is a weighing up decision as to what you could do with the opportunity of that £31 million in reallocating it or reallocating part of it.
Thank you. I forget which one it is. Is it Simon or Declan that's financial? So this is one aimed at you, and bearing in mind, I find it difficult to work in my housekeeping anyway, so you've got to dumb it down a little bit for me, I'm afraid. We've just been looking at talking about demand-led budgets. What would be the flip side of that, please? I told you. So.
What do you mean by the flip side of the demand-led thing?
Well, if we didn't have a demand-led budget,
Yeah.
what sort of budget would we have?
Okay, so by demand-led,
Would it be a free-for-all budget? I'm hoping not.
no, there tends to be more kind of, I suppose, the differentiation is kind of ones where you can control and almost set out what you're going to do. I don't know, maybe a library might be an example, although you might get different people, number of people through the door. It largely depends on you make the decisions about the size of the room and the number of the books. Whereas the demand-led, it just presents itself without sort of necessarily your control over, and the social care one tends to be our main ones that we sort of fit into that category, where there's quite a complex chain of events before someone arrives with this presenting needs. So it's just much harder to predict what's going to happen. And the demand-led nature also alludes to the fact that although on something like adult social care, we might be able to set some broad criteria about who we do or don't give services to. If somebody does present meeting those criteria, you have to give them the service. You just don't have a choice. It's kind of, the demand-led is very much, we don't have full control over what costs we spend, whereas the other services, we do tend to be able to define much more tightly ourselves what it is we're going to deliver. Does that help?
Yeah, I mean, I've obviously listened to all of this, and at one point, Jane, you said single local housing plan, combining them together, and a light bulb went on, and I thought, yeah, that's a good idea. But then Mrs. Wright went and said about the housing associations that we've got, so it widens it again. And I know we've got we've asked these minutiae questions at a separate scrutiny group, and I'm hoping that those will be answered to my level of understanding on this. But there seems to be a lot of maybe, should, could, might in this, and a little bit like the country at the moment, isn't it? It's one of those things that we either suck it and see and trust that it will work, or plan it. And I would rather plan it. That is my personal opinion, and I told Councillor Pendleton off for making a statement, so I better shut up now. Yeah. And right. We now enter a free-for-all, and you're not restricted at all to any part of the page, the report. So are there any other questions that we have not covered yet? Mrs.
Thank you. Just going back to page 193 and 194, just really about the financials and the setups. I'm just looking at what would be sort of proposed under the parish and town councillors, and they've got quite a large remit there for them to take on. I'm thinking about a lot of the parish councils in my division that are very rural and only have 3 or 4 members, and looking at those requirements there, I don't think with the best will in the world that they'd be able to deliver on them. So it's just how you would see the parish and town councils improving to be able to take on some of their responsibilities, what training might be in place for them, and are you looking at possibly having an allowance for parish councillors within this financial that we've got here, because I think there's quite a big role for them to take on, and a lot of, well, parish councillors are all volunteers, they don't get paid for any of their time, but you're asking them for a lot more within this structure. So I'm just wondering, training and financially, what you propose for parish and town councils.
Yes, thank you.
The reason that I've said that I'd like to answer it is that back in July, when we had the annual meeting with parish councils, I was asked to make a presentation on the concept of a unitary council, which I did do, and then I took questions from the floor afterwards. In no way was I predetermining my position, because I'm keeping an open mind at the moment till I've got facts available at my fingertips. But the response afterwards in the workshops was, we need to know more about this. Within my own division, I have 12 parish councils, Market Bosworth division, which is part of Hinckley and Bosworth. Some of them are very small, with only 106 houses that make up the entire parish area. Others are much bigger, with 1,000 houses that make up a much larger settlement. Some of them have already said, don't like this idea, we do this voluntary, don't want to take on more responsibility. Others have taken a different approach, and I think it's very much a question for those of us here at County Hall to make sure that people actually fully understand what it would mean. And I don't believe at the moment that enough people out in Leicestershire understand. And the notion that this is now dead, which is, I believe, being referred to both in the politics show yesterday and again on the radio today, doesn't answer the question of how you meet demand-led budgets, which is the biggest driver to having to look at change that we possibly can do.
Mr. Walsh.
It's actually on that point that I wanted to come back about. That we all understand the enormous pressure that the county's under budget-wise. So that my introductory question is, I wonder if Declan can tell us what's the annual savings amount that we've made to date in the work, the sort of transformation work that we've done?
Over the last 10 years, it's circa £200 million. So we tend to have been running at the rate of about £20 million a year.
About £20 million a year.
For the last, yeah.
So, but annually, so now, this forthcoming year, we're spending 200 million less than we would have done in the past.
Some of it is cost avoidance, effectively. The costs would have, if we hadn't have done anything, and we were allowed to increase council tax just as we'd wanted, the answer is yes to your question, that that would be a £200 million bigger organisation. Obviously, there's others caveats around that, but that's crudely the right way of thinking it, yeah.
Okay, so I was listening to Ivan talk, and we all know how much this demand-led budget can cost. So 3 children can be £1 million. And we've heard that through the things we've done, we've saved 200 million, and we know that libraries have closed, that we don't cut the grass anymore. We've cut so many different services, and now we turn our eyes to what we could save with the districts. So some people will be worried discretionary services and the very high quality services offered by the districts could be treated as county discretionary services have done in the past. But the bit that I'm interested in is the saving could be 30 million a year. At 3 children eating up £1 million of that, and having to date saved 200 million a year, how long will 30 million last before the following year we're in a mess again? Surely the answer to this is for the Treasury to fund this council properly, not to snatch at 30 million and wreck high quality local services.
And the crude run rate, if we look at sort of a government sort of real terms increase, and you get that, you're basically left with that funds inflationary costs, pay rises, costs of social care contracts, things like that. Our growth tends to run at sort of 10 to 12 million pounds a year mark, so it tends to be that sort of 3-year period. You're right about the sort of this, I suppose, the fair funding type campaign. At the moment, we haven't assumed any benefit of that because it's so uncertain. Obviously, kind of the Chancellor's already alluded there's no new money, so it would be kind of robbing Peter to pay Paul. Our expectation, if anything does come from that, it would be damped quite heavily. So a lot of this is pushing out time, so that damping could basically unwind, so that actually you do get a reasonable amount of money in. So a lot of this does tend to be kind of, you're just keeping ahead of, I don't know, the cliff edge, as it were. But it would make a significant difference, because you'd still carry on looking for other avenues. We'd still do things like purchase capital assets that we get a return from, to just forever trying to push it away. So you're forever trying to make the authority more sustainable, and this would make a big difference in to do that.
In response to what Jeff has just said, you have to put the current setup in Leicestershire into the context of the United Kingdom. Scotland, Northern Ireland, Wales and most of England operate on a unitary system. They do not operate on a two-tier system. I think out of 151 authorities, it's something like 23 left that operate on a two-tier system, and that may be 22 now, following James Brokenshire's announcement on Buckinghamshire last week. I was in the Home Office on Thursday as chair of the Regional Migration Board. It was the first time I'd been, so I did my usual of being relatively quiet and listening to more experienced people than me talking. But I actually had to say in the meeting, can you please refer to the position of two-tier authorities? Because nobody else in that meeting did that. They just assumed that what they'd got with their unitary organisation, whether they were from Glasgow or from Wolverhampton, was the norm across the country. And it is a fact that the current organisation is now quite a small minority in the way that councils are organised.
Yeah, I'd just like to draw councilholders' attention to the fact that Scotland, Wales and should be in Northern Ireland have a regional government. Perhaps if we had an English Parliament, we need to change it. But while we haven't, you can't compare us.
What Jeff has said is completely correct, but for the purposes of immigration into the UK, they're all treated around the table in the same way.
Mrs. Fryer.
Thank you. Mrs. Taylor raised the point about parish councils and the varying sizes, budgets they've already got, what they cover, what they don't cover. Because, of course, also they look after land, they look after their own properties, and figures were given earlier in the discussion about the number of phone calls that are made or contacts here of people not knowing the correct council they should be dealing with. Well, I think exactly can be said about parish councils. An awful lot of people phone their parish council and are then directed to the same place. I do think it has to be looked at. In the division I look after, there aren't very many, well, there's only 2 parish councils, but they're very big parish councils. They cover a lot of population. They're already taking on responsibility. But, as has been raised, they're all done by volunteers. And the pot of volunteers at that level is getting smaller and smaller. So my question is...
Thank you.
She was coming, I was coming. My question is that should it come to the expectation of parish councils take on more responsibility, how would, I presume there will be plans, are there plans in place to encourage people to become parish council? Are you going to look at remuneration for them? Because that would be an added cost. Because obviously the time that it's going to take is a lot of time. So I really do think that has got to be something I would like more information on, particularly with the parish councils. Thank you.
Simon.
So in response, Mr. Old referred to a meeting back in July of the parish and town councils. Since then, there's been 2 or 3 other events, making sure that the engagement with that sector is held soon and gives them an opportunity to help shape exactly what those proposals are. Because as you say, there is a broad range of requirement and expectation from the larger town councils to the smaller parish councils as well. So we're at the beginning of I think a really important set of conversations with that sector to make sure we understand what they would want as part of a unitary proposal, and that can be reported back to various committees in due course.
Thank you. If I may just come back, Mr. Old did refer to the meeting in the summer. Do you know, or can you tell me, how many parish councils actually attended, out of how many, or the percentage? Because I know some parish councils, because of the way they're structured, and may not have. So I don't know how many we've got in the county, but it's a lot of parish councils, and I'm just interested if there is any statistics that out of those, what was the attendance like?
I can't provide a detailed number, Mrs. Fryer, but to reassure you that the local association now represents all parish councils. There's weekly newsletters that go out to all those parish councils. They invited all of those groups to form part of a focus group that engages with us officers leading on the unitary proposals. Clearly not all of them could be represented, but they all had the opportunity to do that. And that conversation is ongoing. And there are other mechanisms as well being put in place so that all those parish and town councils can be part of that conversation. And finally, at an event with clerks, I've certainly invited or offered invitations from each of those town councils, parish councils, to go to any of their meetings to talk to them about what those proposals are, and I'm happy to do that. So we're keen to hear from them as much as they're keen to hear from us.
Simon is coming to Thurmaston next week, I believe. Thank you.
I am.
Well, I'm just going to join in this little debate about austerity and demand-led budgets, but they don't mix. Where's Ivan gone? Marvellous. I mean, that's the problem. It's the government's policy on local government finance that's landed us in this situation, and that's what we're having to deal with. But I did also want to ask, if we've got local area committees dealing with planning applications, are we not still sorting out the local plan across the whole county like we currently do with minerals and waste?
So the report does suggest that a single local plan might be the way forward. That's set out in which page, I can't quite recall, but and that would be a proposal, and that's something that the area committees can be forming part of, again, and local and neighbourhood plans from parish councils as well. So again, the report articulates a way forward. So paragraphs 86 table and on the previous page just sets out that proposal. So that's something in the report for people to give consideration to.
It looks, Trevor, like you'd be blaming Glenfield, not Colville, for what goes on in Castle Donington. Anyway, that's all from me, but I'll certainly speak at the end of the conclusions, if I may.
Right, I have 2 more speakers, and then it'll be the conclusion. And because we've spent an hour and a half on this subject, had lots of discussions, and you've all took an active part, so thank you very much for that. Right, Councillor Page.
Thank you. First of all, Simon, let me be the first one to take your offer up to come and speak to the parishes. I will book you. So saves me doing it. Secondly, I've also would like, before we sum up, to hear from Ivan, because he does know this department in and out, where he can see, in his own opinion, benefits and pitfalls, because there's got to be a risk somewhere. And my last point is for Declan, really. Everybody says, oh yeah, well, districts and better funding and this and that, and we know it's not going to happen. And I recall you mentioning at one point, and I just wanted reaffirming, and you talking me through it, that this authority could, to deliver all of the services, would only be having a certain time span of possibly 3 years or whatever until we are dealing, you know, with when the reality knocks on the door. So talk me through that. Then the second stage, as I understand, it is if we are in a position of where reality knocks on the door, we cannot deliver even statutory services anymore. Is there, what then happens? Do I understand that regardless of what we are doing now, government will come in, take over, and we will be enforced a unitary status? So are we then not in a better position of talking about this first and putting our ducks in a row should that happen? So just talk me through that process for the record. Thank you.
I'm not sure whether all of that fits within the remit of this scrutiny, but I will, if you understood all of that, I will allow one of you to answer.
Question is, if we can't, if we have a demand-led budget and we haven't got the money, and you know, then where will we be in a nutshell?
Okay, I'll try and sort of summarise it quite heavily. We've always, where we're sitting at the moment is next 2 years we've got a balanced budget, and then after that there's a bit of a gap appearing. And we've always tried to do it without sort of playing sort of accounting fun and games, because the problem with those is when the trouble bites, it bites you worse, because you've built up things like you've got more debt, you've emptied your provisions, things like that, and that's the boat Northamptonshire got in. So they didn't really take positive action. They just delayed. You know, they tried sort of different accounting tricks and stuff like that. So when it hits you harder. So you know, with 2 years balanced without fun and games, and then you may have a period of where you just try to keep the wolf from the door by sort of trying other things, but we'll obviously look for new savings in the interim period. So that period may move, but that's the latest estimate. If you do get to the position where you can't deliver statutory services, you're effectively in the boat if you can't balance your budget. And again, that's where Northamptonshire had to raise a Section 114 notice. So it's basically saying your expenditure exceeding your income and you can't see a way forward, and you need kind of much more drastic action to address that balance, because otherwise you're operating illegally. Now, government haven't said there's a prescribed method of what's happened, but if you look not just at Northamptonshire, at Rotherham, at Birmingham, when an authority's got itself into trouble, the first thing that government does is send the commissioners in. And if the government's going to take the line that there's not going to be any bailouts, and you can see why they're doing that, because then all of a sudden everybody's just going to start letting themselves go and stop making savings if they think the bailout's coming. There's not a whole lot of options left for government. They've basically got two. They could either do with something, a county area like Northamptonshire, and force it into unitary status, or if it was a smaller organisation, they could make it merge with a neighbouring one. And there's a few small districts have gone that way. And there's even one of the small unitaries, Tor Bay, I think it is, has basically offered to the county council for discussions about whether it actually gets re-amalgamated back into the county. So there's a few things they could do, but it does seem to centre around there's not going to be any bailout, so you have to end up doing something structurally.
Mr. Old.
My name mentioned by Rosita. Well, we've already got an SEN overspend in the current financial year in excess of 3 million. And thanks to work by Sharon and Jane and Paul Meredith when he was here, at the moment the social care budget is not overspending, but could easily tip over. So I might have to, if I'm still the person who's the post holder, come to this committee at some point in the not too distant future, and I would think, when I'm saying that, year, 18 months, and say to you, we are overspending to the point where I'm going to have to cut everything out, which is not statutory. Oh, and by the way, we don't need to go and consult on this, because it's got to happen in order for us to stay viable within our budget. That is not a scare statement. You've only got to look down the road in Northamptonshire to see what happens when you reach that stage if you haven't pre-planned for it.
Thank you, Ivan. I like this part because it says chairman's discretion. So behave yourself, Mr. Sheehan. Go.
I always try and behave myself, Chair, and you're there just in case I step outside the circle, as it were. I think you've got some serious issues here. The harmonisation of council tax risks poorer services through this process of levelling down, on top of the inevitable competition for resources from social care and other demand-led services. This is what the districts and boroughs are worried about, and the real problem is that they've disengaged now with the process. I think any chance of negotiating away those issues have gone effectively. And it's because you didn't engage with them effectively in the first place. You left it too late. And I think now it's going to be pretty much impossible to make progress on this, sadly. So that's all I have to say.
Thank you for that. Lots of comments made and frantically written down. I've just frightened them to death and asked for conclusions, and it's going to be very difficult to pick something out from this. So the conclusions from this meeting will be worked out shortly.
They'll be published at the beginning of next week, I'm hoping, as part of a report that will go to the Scrutiny Commission on the 14th of November. So that will summarise not just the draft minutes, but there'll also be a summary of emerging themes to make it a bit easier for the Scrutiny Commission to understand what the scrutiny process has been to date.
In light of the fact that officers will be pulling that together, I think it's quite important to make certainly our group's position clear that we see that £30 million will be eaten up and disappeared before we know it.
Any other comments from anyone?
I'm so sorry. I'm going to do it. Look,
Mr. Pendleton.
You can. Thank you, Chair. You can debate this in whatever way you want, but the question is: taxpayers' money or ratepayers' money? It's the same money. It's their money that we're spending. I asked Declan, which is the more efficient, a two-tier or a one-tier system? Thank you, Chair.
Go on then, Declan.
The accountant's answer is a single-tier setup.
Right, I would like to thank all of you for sitting here. We've been here for a very long time, so thank you very much. And for those that are hearing it all again tomorrow or the next day, yeah, hey, I'm not. So thank you. Good night. Good afternoon.